Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily. We're on 57. This is the community back and forth show where we discuss all things End of Dragons. You guys have any thoughts as the video goes along, feel free to drop them down below and they could appear in the next part. The topic today is we're rounding out a little bit of the Ranger discussion, finalizing that for now. Maybe we'll return to it later, who knows. But yeah, you guys had so many cool ideas and interesting theories that I wanted to spotlight even more of them. And I've got a pretty interesting idea for the next topic as well, so keep an eye out for that towards the end. Let's jump in, not dilly-dally. First of all, from Viper07, just before we get to the Ranger stuff, who says, Apache helicopters, Char helicopters, Citadel bombardment. Is it that crazy, WP? Is it really? Yes, it is that crazy. This person is talking about the commando and the idea that that airship strike ability can actually appear in game. Look, I was too lazy to do this yesterday. I'm going to do it now. Look in the background. Look at this footage. This is supposedly a skill. All right, how would this work in like any kind of interior? What, you're going to summon these in the Ascalon catacombs and they're going to be flying beautifully through the corridors inexplicably? You know, how they got there, we don't really have to worry about that. Or more likely, they would just be clipping through stuff. This is just so not fit for purpose. Come on, the scale of this animation is way too big for anything in the game. It is crazy. And then you might say, oh, well, WP, they can just shrink them down. In which case, yes, they could do something like that, but it would not be what the trailer was suggesting it would be, which was the point I was making. Maybe they can do the commando, but it will not be what you're looking at here. It just went, it's nuts, guys. Next, we've got World, who I'm now noticing has got quite a few comments on the recent videos. They say Ranger concept, the deep shield, the deep defender. I have to say, I'm not a super fan of this idea, but they do bring an interesting concept into it. They say this is a dwarven tradition recently discovered with the resurfacing of the Deljamor dwarves. These defenders of the deep have learned to share their stone skin with their animal companions. Together they fortify and protect the front lines against the destroyer Scourge. They wield offhand shields and strike commands against its surface with their main hand to direct their stony companion in battle. Now the dwarves have resolved to share their secrets with the surface world, bestowing the 5 races with these special shields infused with the blessings of the Great Dwarf. I like the idea of infusing some dwarf lore into this spec, and it retains the stone petrification concept. Could be readapted to an Echo Vowed theme easily in my opinion, but with this spec, I like the idea of it empowering your pet, boosting its functionality, and making it more of a beastmaster and tactician. Your pet taunts and waylays enemies, keeping them close together or away from others. I like the idea of having an expanded pet bar with more skills. The shield skills focus on control and CC, but I really like the flavour of those shield skills being commands for your pet, maybe playing into the expanded bar, coupled with an animation where you hit with your sword or dagger against the shield, of course, for a cool sound effect. It is meant to be about tanking and control with a focus on utilising the animal companions as much as possible, and the blessing of the shield gives your pet a Sony infusion to play into the boosted defense concept. There's actually a lot that I can mention here. First of all, I don't really know about adding like an infusion visual aesthetic thing onto all the Rangers that decide to opt into this spec. I actually think you'd see a little bit of outcry for that. I think the cosmetics matter a lot to people. Maybe if it was something that flared up just during certain animations, I could see it and that would work quite well. But and I like the individual pieces here. A lot of you guys seem very inspired about some kind of Ranger spec that is more about tanking. I think it's very easy to look at Ranger and say, oh well, look, you've got like a DPS-y thing with the Soul Beast, and maybe you can consider the Druid to be a Healy thing. Well, maybe we can look at the third element of the Trinity, so to speak, here and get something about more control. It is true already that Beast Mastery has, you know, taunt on Beast skill, but play further with that. And I especially like this idea that they have a lot of aggro and they pull the people together. That was something we saw even in Guild Wars 1, where you kind of had this very soft idea of tanking, and I've never properly experienced in Guild Wars 2. So I like that as well. But the thing is, I think doing like an Echo Vowed plus Dwarf plus all this stuff all mixed together, I just don't see it. I also don't really see a Dwarf Ranger pairing. Like, the concept of using Dwarf lore for one of the new elite specializations is brilliant to me. And in fact, there's any number of weird things they can do depending on how the Icebreed Saga ends. If the Icebreed Saga ends with Primordus dead, What does that mean? The right of the Great Dwarf goes away, and they are dwarves, but they're not stony anymore, in which case we would drop the stone theme? Or are they going to take the story in a direction where the dwarves no longer have a purpose, and they just become stone, full stone now, and they just become inanimate forevermore, and that's it, their purpose is done? That kind of feels like maybe something ArenaNet would do. Or do they just go back to the depths and they don't care anymore? Or return to the mountains, and that becomes a point of conflict between them and the Norn in the future? The Norn who also are kind of freely liberated to return to the far Shiver Peaks, because Jormag might be gone at the end of the Icebreed Saga. And all of these things could influence an elite spec. They really could. I just don't see Dwarf plus Ranger. I see like Ogre plus Ranger, but obviously the Ogres aren't that interesting to people and don't have any particular relevance with the current story. So I don't know, but maybe we can save this. You infuse some Deljamore stuff into the new Warrior spec, maybe, or whatever. Especially if they've got ideas for the Dredge and the Echovaled Forest and, the tunnels and all the mountains around there. Maybe we'll see some fun stuff. Mr. Jack says, you can't talk about Ranger speculation without mentioning the Hammer Bunny Thumper, one of the most iconic Ranger builds of Guild Wars 1. Yeah, so in a previous part, I think you're so onto something here. In a previous part, I was talking about that rifles seems like a really good two-handed weapon that they could give this a lot of people have the expectations of. Some of you guys expanded on my commentary as well in the comments in some nice ways. The expectations World of Warcraft players have of the Ranger basically being like the Hunter, and the Hunter could use rifles, so people want it for that reason as well. I think that's they're all very valid points too. But if you're not going with the rifle, I do think Hammer's a good idea. I mean, we could talk about shields, we could talk about maces and lots of these martial things. Hammer is kind of high on my list. For people that don't know, the way that the Ranger worked in Guild Wars 1 is its unique attribute line had like the special effect of reducing skill energy costs. In Guild Wars 1, every profession had a unique line that did something special, and for Rangers that meant that any kind of upfront skill that should cost a lot of energy was now quite cheap. And so a build was born whereby you'd be a very durable Ranger rampaging around with your pet using a hammer, and hammer attacks are supposed to cost a lot of energy because they're very high damage, very high impact, lots of CC on them, but Rangers could kind of spam them out even better than Warriors could because of their expertise line that reduced the energy. And this was kind of a very oppressive, and many people who played it will look back on it very fondly, build known as the Bunny Thumper. And I think even to this day, like look at the poll we talked about yesterday, a good proportion of the people listening to this video right now, they're Guild Wars 1 players, or people that were there in those early areas. If they happen to be a PvPer then, they're listening to my voice right now, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And they might be looking for a little bit of something from that in End of Dragons. They might want that hammer back. So whether ArenaNet would then make some kind of heavy CC thing out of it, I don't know, but it makes sense considering so many people already have been talking about control, like in the previous comment we just had a second ago. So yeah, Bunny Thumper, I can definitely see. I also, for what it's worth, want to give a little bit of a shout out to the old Ranger / Paragon build, which was also ludicrously dominant back in Team Arenas and was very pet oriented as well. But I see much less people talking about that. I think because that was more the Eye of the North era, and a lot of people weren't focusing on TA at that point. Next, we've got Emma, who says, here's my idea for the Ranger spec, the Tree Singer. Back in Guild Wars 1, the Kurziks had these people called the Tree Singers, who would sing the songs of the Arboreum in the awakening ceremonies to attach a volunteer human spirit to a forever tree. These were sacred, powerful trees that the Kurziks had in their forest to turn the person into a juggernaut. By the way, this idea of a spirit inhabiting a tree in the Echovaled Forest is obviously something Guild Wars 2 people are familiar with. There's a lot of overlap, as always, with the Sylvari in the Grove. A juggernaut is a large mobile plant construct, and after the process their minds and intelligence are still intact, so they are more than mindless weapons. Yeah, the juggernaut lore is fantastic. One of my favorite things about the juggernauts in general was that you could walk around with these basically superhumans. They're the Guild Wars universe's Spartans, okay, as far as like the Halo universe is concerned. That's really how I see a juggernaut, and they're really interesting because they still have their soul. They're like the Exalted to a certain degree as well. They still have their sentience. It's kind of, I actually view the process now that the Exalted are in the lore as something that the devs could tie together. You know, if we have another city of the Exalted out there in Cantha, having them somewhere near some forever trees and drawing direct comparisons would be really cool. Anyway, I digress. Emma says, for the Ranger, They learn the songs of the Arboreum from the tree singers and learn to do the awakening ceremonies on their pets. The pets volunteer to be turned into a juggernaut, and their ranger has a big juggernaut companion. The juggernaut wouldn't be as big because they'd be doing a merge with an animal, so they'd be about as big as Jotun. Well, hold on. The Guild Wars 1 juggernauts were about that big as well. They weren't that huge. They were about Jotun size, weren't they? I would love to have a thing where the ranger finishes training their new elite specialization and has to go to the Echo Forest to do the awakening ceremony and upgrade their pet into a juggernaut. The ranger themselves would wield a mace to deal blunt damage and stun opponents. The utility skills would be songs. Different songs give your juggernaut a more powerful, different skill than the one you're using it. Well, look, I don't know about mace tied with this. I think you could kind of put anything with it, and mace seems a little bit boring. If you've got a big juggernaut ally, presumably that's a frontliner, so the most complementary thing would be a ranged weapon, right? And I know that they've already got a pretty comprehensive arsenal in that area. But I really like this idea. I've always thought of the juggernauts as being something a player would transform into. Like, I always thought of like a warrior spec that would become the juggernaut, and you'd be just this giant leafy green thing. Or it would be some part of the mount system. And the reason I say that is because, you know, presumably if there were going to be mounts, then you'd have like a siege turtle mount, and the equivalent is the juggernaut, so maybe you're riding the juggernaut or becoming the juggernaut for a second. I know that sounds crazy because you'd be like inside it, so to speak, not necessarily just riding on its shoulders. Think about how big it would have to have a Norn riding on its shoulders, by the way. But then in Guild Wars 1, you kind of get swallowed by the Janundu and their kind of mounts to a certain degree, so maybe they would do these things, but as a ranger spec works well, and what I think is really inspired here, like I love this idea that actually it's the pet that becomes the juggernaut. I don't think it has to be small. I think all the pets can become the same kind of juggernaut. Maybe the category of pet you are changes the kind of juggernaut it is. Now that would be really involved. That would be a way of keying into all the existing pets and maybe improving diversity a little bit. Maybe, you know, Devourers become the best kind of juggernaut for a lot of situations, and now Rangers like to run Devourers or something like that. I think that could be fun. And also it allows the juggernaut to still be somewhat like subservient to you and have this kinship and companionship with you, because it retains sentience, but it's the pet's sentience, so you still command it in the same way. I like this. It just falls into this problem of it being like another AI thing, but we're in the realm of Ranger here, guys. And that's kind of always going to be the thing. We are at least swapping one AI, a pet, for another AI, a juggernaut. So I think we haven't expanded on the amount of AI running around, and maybe that means it's fine. Next, we've got Mish Sayuif, who says, I want a ranger to have your 2 pets out at once. Maybe a little bit of a nerf to your damage for the trade-off, but each combination of pets you have out gives you a new F2 beast ability. This is brilliant as well. This is like the idea of adding dual skills. You know, like the thief has dual wield. And, wait, the Weaver one's not called dual wield, is it? It's called dual something else. Is it just dual skills? Anyway, it's like this idea, but for the pets. I've always liked this idea. You guys might not know this, but way back, one of the first concepts for a Ranger Elite skill we ever saw, and it never made it into the game, I don't even think we saw it in any of the Alpha conventions, was a skill called Alpha Strike. And Alpha Strike allowed you to have all your pets out at once. And I think, did that even include, like, if you had a terrestrial underwater pet, it would come out at the same time? For a period of time, and then they go away. The devs never ended up implementing that, but I've always kind of liked it. Again, we're in the AI discussion again. I just want to say that as far as PvE is concerned, I actually really like AI builds. And I like buildcraft around minions and companions. So anything like that for the Ranger there, I think would be fantastic. As far as the competitive formats are concerned, I think we are essentially saying if they do something like this, it's going to be underpowered there, and almost deliberately so, because they don't want a big AI emphasis on those areas of the game. But I would kind of make that trade-off. I think the idea of the mixed beast abilities again is a fantastic thing, because maybe the mix ability of having a devourer and a mower is really, really good. So now, again, you've encouraged some of the weaker pets. Lots of little things they can do here. Next, we have a comment here on kind of the philosophy behind elite specs, and kind of counters something I glossed over in a previous part. So Stripe says, you know what? I don't think there's a huge problem with stepping on toes of other classes of elite specs. In fact, I think it only helps the system. Giving the classes a similar feel to another profession's playstyle is an interesting take. It offers players of the new class an opportunity to really feel different from their base class. It could grant some of that dual class nostalgia that Guild Wars 2 doesn't quite give. You mentioned Ranger single target DPS rifle class would be too close to the Deadeye. My counterpoint is Rangers don't have a good range specialization specialization. They have longbows getting piercing, but the weapon is slow and boring to use. Give the class rifles and have it play with range as a mechanic more. Make it more of a master of long distance, but for ranger. Thieves can have Deadeye, warriors can do whatever they want, so why can't rangers do it too? Especially as we continue to make new elite specializations, stepping on toes will be an inevitability, so why not lean into it and allow professions to cross-class of sorts, while sticking to their base guns. This widens the net for brainstorming too from a developmental standpoint. As long as the theme of the base class is kept, the elite specs should be able to do whatever they want or whatever they need to bring new flavor to the class. The real kicker is that in order to do these cross-classy specs, the devs have to get more creative with the why and how, not so much the what. Right, so from a lot of perspectives, I really agree with you. I think you've got an absolutely good point, and I think already we've seen a lot of the boundaries be crossed over. I think it's an inevitability as we continue adding more elite specs, and if the devs want to like lean into it, so to speak, then they should be allowed to. But I do want to be careful about like overstating the value of some of this stuff. Like the idea that it's cross-classing, I get from all the fundamental principles and ideas why it would be kind of like cross-classing and kind of feel like the secondary profession system from Guild Wars 1. But the thing is, unless ArenaNet explicitly title and theme and package those ideas as cross-classing and as secondary mechanics, I think the vast majority of players won't recognize or appreciate that dynamic to it, and it will essentially be valueless. Like, for example, how so many places in the game already there are ritualist feeling experiences. Like, you can kind of play a Guild Wars 1 ritualist if you are a Kala Revenant. Has that stopped people asking for a ritualist in Guild Wars 2? No. There are lots of assassin-y playstyles. Has that stopped people asking for an assassin? No. There are monkey ideas all over the place, particularly a lot of them in Guardian. Has that stopped people asking for a monk? No. And it's because it doesn't have that big, you know, picture on the cover. People are very superficial and they need that like blunt packaging. Then you can sell it that way. So I don't think your idea here would be explicitly great, because it's kind of in the half and half world where a lot of people won't recognize it for what it is. I also have to say, I totally disagree with the comment that Rangers don't have a good range specialization. Like, what are you talking about? Ranger has the marksmanship line. And yes, I agree, longbow is boring, all right? The loop and the idea of longbow is fairly boring. They even nerfed some of the more interesting elements of the auto attack, doing more damage the further range away you are. But then they added that new function to the Grandmaster, which means if you're at max range, you get quickness just on auto attacks and stuff like that. So look, I don't think you can just state as a fact that Rangers don't have a good range specialization. They do, and they've even got kind of a more mobile Condi approach with the short bows. So I don't know if there's that much space for a rifle on there too. It's not so much about the fact that Engineer has a rifle and Warrior has a rifle and Deadeye has a rifle, and some of them use them in kind of a sniper capacity. It's just how it fits with the rest of the Ranger kit that I've got more of my eye on than anything else. But they could do it, and I anticipate seeing a lot of this kind of overlap, as you've so eloquently explained, a lot going forwards. Christ, that was evident the day that the Dragon Hunter got traps, no? Next, we've got Jared Bates, who said, I would also love a trapper-type ranger. Canthan Ranger did bring in some new traps back in the faction days, and perhaps giving Ranger a rifle would allow a more tactical trap-style rifle Ranger, think military, rather than a Deadeye-style sniper, utilizing traps to tactically root down the enemy and finish them off with the rifle after the fact. Well, I can already imagine you doing stuff like that with, you know, the chill application or the knockdown, or I should say the zero range launch on the spike trap. I can kind of see some of that. There's an interesting issue here, which I can see the devs have been butting heads with for a while. I think it's happening a lot on Necromancer as well when they think about adding more minion-y type stuff. It's that if they add another set of traps, you know, kind of like what the Thief Preps became, and let's not forget what the Thief Preps look like. To me, they really feel very Canthan, and it's very strange how they ended up coming into the game, what with all the bamboo and stuff. If they do that, it's kind of like you're almost just expanding on a category of skills that they already have, or a playstyle or a feeling that's already there. And it's the same with like Necro. If you're adding a Necro spec that is all about death magic and minions, what are you going to do? Just add more minions, or another type of utility skill that is basically a minion but has a different name just so that it feels slightly different and slightly more special. You know, like we got Rise on the Reaper, but at least that could definitively be executed like a shout. And I think they're running into this with the trap thing with the Ranger as well. You want something trappy? Maybe the answer is not to make a new elite specialization. Maybe the answer is to rework the existing Ranger traps and, you know, improve their use, particularly with synergies for a future elite spec in mind. And we see the devs do that a lot of the time. It's just they're not explicit about the fact it's for future elite specs because they're keeping quiet about them. There is another thing as well. The Guild Wars 1 trap system was very different in that you could reduce the cooldown of the traps in various ways. There were even elite skill specifically designed around that so that you could spam tons and tons and tons of them all on the same spot and essentially turn them into a nuke. ArenaNet very deliberately decided they didn't want that in Guild Wars 2. You can only have one category of each trap at each time. I don't know whether we'll ever see them go back on that philosophy, but they have in the past, like when they added Alacrity with the Chronomancer. Once upon a time, they said they'd never let you affect skill cooldowns whatsoever, and then that will change with Heart of Thorns, as did so many things. Lastly, we've got Eltrue, who said, my first sort of idea came to mind was something like a shaman or a soul mage, like a ranger focused on magic wielding, a spirit themed spec with maybe some AoE, probably wielding a scepter. Look, I think this is still very viable. The idea of a shaman-esque kind of ranger has been on my list for years, and it does sort of work when it comes to Cantha. If you're going for like this primal magic idea, you know, there's that lore about how they were using magic before the gods formally gifted to them. You can go with that a little bit. This spirit idea, you know, you've got the ritualist and this honoring heroes of the past. They could definitely do that as well. Putting it on the ranger to make some kind of a shaman works. One thing that's always been kind of absent from class mechanics and even the lore to a large degree is like this idea of like totems. Now, you know, in some ways they refer to the Norn transforms as invoking their totem or whatever, but what I specifically mean is like that World of Warcraft idea of a shaman that uses totems as, you know, kind of like how engineers use turrets, I suppose, to a certain degree. We haven't seen them play with that. You look at games like Path of Exile, where you can create them and there's all these laser beam mechanics where you connect to it and then people that pass through the beam take damage. All those kinds of ideas we haven't really seen Guild Wars play with in any way. So I think there's a whole specialization available. And if I was going to do some kind of like totemic or shaman or whatever, I think I'd probably put it on the ranger. So this could totally work too. It's another like magic inclined ranger, and maybe the idea of being more of a survivalist and more about nature and materials and the physical world is what they want to play with more. But I see this as being totally possible, and I'm glad at least one person said it out there. So there you have it, guys. That's a little bit more on the ranger. Thanks very much for listening. Now, the next topic, I'm really interested in this. You guys may want to go to the Guild Wars 1 wiki to sort of prompt you a bit. But what I want to know is what creatures you guys are excited to see come in with the next X-Pack. So what I mean by this is when, for example, Path of Fire was coming out, they tried to bring back several elements of the enemies that we saw in that area of the world in the first game. Like we saw the Jacarandas come back, and we saw the Abogas come back, and we saw the Hydra. The Hydra, for example, almost didn't make it into Path of Fire. They really crunched and pushed to get it there. I think even it was specifically one dev worked their arse off for it, and they end up one of the best things about the expansion. Some of the most exciting bounties and lots of variety to them. The whole like Hydra with their heads chopped off thing. I want to know like what equivalents you're thinking of for End of Dragons. Cantha is an area filled with interesting creatures. You got the salt sprays to think about. Just look at the footage that I showed you yesterday when we were in the Echovald Forest. All those different kinds of vampires and gargoyles and gaki and rotwallows and oni. There's so much out there. So I'm really curious what you guys are thinking on that. And I'm going to steal a suggestion straight away. I definitely want to see the Tree Guardian return. This was like a flavor, a type of oak heart that was totally badass. We're talking a bit about the Juggernauts and the Siege Turtles before. So yeah, fauna in Cantha. Give me all your cool ideas, and I want to spotlight them and give you guys some good thoughts on it on the next one. So thanks very much for watching, everybody. This was End of Dragons 57. I'll see you tomorrow for 58. And another big thanks to everybody who joined the guild again last night. These videos aren't going up early on Patreon at the moment because I'm caught behind, but very soon I'll get back on top of that, and the advertisement for that will go out as normal. Cheers, everybody. See you tomorrow.